there, and welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb, and today I'm joined by Scott Keith and Dan Price. We're doing a special episode of the Thinking Fellows where we're going to talk about the coronavirus. I think people are locked up at home.
We should start with like a news alert, like bleep, 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 bleep.
Scott, I didn't realize you were that kind of doctor.
I'm not. I'm like in that cartoon. I'm one of the useless kind of doctors.
Yeah. And part of this, too, is, people who have heard Dan on the show before, because Dan's come and talked about Christ the Old Testament and some of the things he does at 1517 on the show. What we're doing today is actually an experimental type of recording. I think fellows have never recorded an episode by distance before. And
not once. This is number one.
This is number one. So please bear with us. I'm doing everything I can to try to make this as technically efficient as possible. But if you hear something in this episode, you can write me about it and something like that. But just know that this is a process that I'm working through and that this episode may not be 100% perfect.
We also are recording away from our normal studio because we are taking
precautions,
all precautions, reasonable precautions, and staying at home for the most part.
Right. So, and I think that'll help transition into this episode. We'll talk about reasonable precautions here in a minute. Before that, I did want to make a couple announcements. Unfortunately, many of the events that people who have been hearing me ask you to attend, consider attending, things like that over the last couple of months, both our city events in Las Vegas and some of the individual events that
the Europe event in Germany.
The Europe event in Germany. Those things are being postponed right now. They will eventually be rescheduled. No telling when now, as we all wait this out. But in our sort of concern of serving our neighbor and doing our vocation and to try to keep people, safe, those things have been postponed. Is there anything else people need to know about those postponed? If you already bought a ticket to one of those events,
I don't know about the Germany event. Wasn't planned by us. We were simply attending as a group of speakers, so they can take care of that. The city event is free, so there's no ticket refunds there. The other events were events where we had speakers that were coming into individual events, just on a for-hire basis, so those venues would take care of anything if they sold tickets. I don't think that they did.
No, I believe that all the events that we've canceled over the next 6 weeks are non-ticketed events.
Yeah, that's great.
In the sense that there may be a sign-up form or something like that, but there's no cost for the ticket, with the exception of the Germany event, and they have already begun the process of issuing refunds and stuff. So if there's people in Germany listening to this that we're going not because they knew about those people, but we're going because they listen to Thinking Fellows or any of the other stuff that we do, they've already been in contact with everyone and they'll be issuing refunds, even though the hope is, it's a little, it's hard to talk about some of these things because you just don't know. There's just not that much information. But so the hope is that it'll be rescheduled, but they're going to actually refund everything because it will probably be quite some time before that gets rescheduled.
Well, even on our end, the president, Caleb and I went to. We were practicing safe social distancing, but we had to go to we don't get our mail at our house, so right. we have to go into town to get our mail because we live in the mountains and they don't do individual home delivery in the mountains.
So you got to go to the post office box.
Yeah, so we were doing that, and on the way back we were listening to the radio and heard President Trump recommend that if you can avoid groups of 10 or more, that you should do so.
Rough news for all those homeschool families with 11 kids.
Yeah, rough news.
They're gonna have some rough conversations around the dinner table tonight.
As Johnny and Sally are sitting in their bedroom eating dinner. So, no, it's by some perceptions, it's getting a little crazy out there. But at the same time, as an organization that tries to be responsible and that tries, we try to be good citizens and we try to be good neighbors. To not heed that advice seems just sort of willful.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, Scott, you and I sort of made the decision on these events, and it didn't take us too many conversations. It wasn't that hard of a decision to try to, when you're an organization, most organizations don't have systems in place. It's not like we have a doctor, that kind of doctor on staff.
Yeah, we have a lot of
That's
doctors, just not that
yeah,
kind.
not that kind of
Maybe,
doctor.
maybe we should acquire one of those doctors.
Yeah. So I mean, the best you can do is sort of follow what the recommendations are that
Yeah.
people that you assume know more than you
Yep.
know, because in reality we don't really know that much, and so there is a responsibility uh, as certainly as Christians, but just as people, but
Yeah.
theologically we have a responsibility to our neighbors, and this would include specifically, our elderly neighbors, people who are more at risk, and that sort of thing. And so we want to honor our fathers and mothers, whether that be our actual fathers and mothers or our fathers and mothers in the faith, and not put them at greater risk. So it wasn't that tough of a decision because it's not that great of sacrifice. It's not as
Yeah.
though our presence is just so needed everywhere. We've got to go, save the world with this message.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is that we're primarily we of course do conferences and send out speakers, and we're very proud of that. But most of the people that interact with us online.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't like on a day-to-day operation sort of basis. This doesn't slow us down much. In fact, in one way, it kind of speeds us up because we're trying to produce while millions of people are sitting at home looking for something to do. We're trying to produce more content that's available online so that we can be one of the options for them.
Right. I mean, without making too light of it, great time to be in the digital media space, because this is actually one of those areas where we can shine and where our existence is, kind of useful.
Or apparently in the delivery business, because I just heard on the radio also that
Amazon's hiring.
Jeff Bezos is saying that they're going to need to hire 100,000 new positions.
Yes.
100,000.
That's crazy. That them and Grubhub, I assume.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oof.
That's
So
but I do think that as even the upside of this, I mean, if you're going to have to sort of self quarantine a little bit and practice social distancing, I mean, we live in the best time ever to have to do that because
Yeah, that's right.
look at what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
I mean,
Although
it's not as though I can't talk to
Yeah.
anybody or I have no contact with anybody or that kind of thing.
Although I will say, and then we should probably get into some of the theology here, but I will say that living up here in Big Bear Lake, California, recently, as a part of the COVID-19 scare, the ski resorts closed early, both of them.
about a month earlier than they usually do.
Yeah, and the governor of California is recommending that most restaurants in California close down their in-person dining. In a town like Big Bear Lake, that represents about 75% of the jobs that are just, gone. If they all do that. Now, not all the restaurants up here are doing that. Big Bear Lake is in the county of San Bernardino. San Bernardino County has 0 reported cases, and so a lot of the restaurant owners up here are, I think, still operating. But, people are taking heed of the warnings and aren't coming into restaurants. And so economically, it's going to be a tough time, I think.
Yeah, I think practically, and this will dovetail into the theological aspect of this, but if you are somebody with the means to do so, I do think that this is a good time to check with people that make that their job might be in jeopardy.
Yeah.
Check with older people that that don't want to leave the house,
Yeah.
offer to get them the things they need. But I mean, I had a couple instances. I have a couple of text message threads with groups of friends and stuff, and I know that some of them have already been temporarily at least laid off and this sort of thing. And there's groups of us that are saying, look, if you need anything, I mean, if you need a haul of groceries or just the money to go get them, if you're worried about, hey, let me pay that electric bill so you don't have to worry about it while you're going through this. Not everybody can do that, but maybe you and a group of other people can come together and do that. I think it is a very good. You have a good opportunity to be brothers and sisters and to be a neighbor to somebody. And so that this is worth doing. I mean, I think it's easy in a panic to become very turned in on yourself, and you want to think, and obviously your primary responsibility is to your family and this sort of thing. But if you have the ability to do so, if you're younger or you have means, you do also, have a responsibility as a friend and a neighbor, as a brother and sister in Christ, to also reach out to other people and say, hey, if there's somebody in my friend group, in my sphere, in my sphere of neighbors that is going to lose their job and is going to be like having like worry about that electric bill getting paid, worry about, I don't know if I can't go make that run on the grocery store, dude, because I don't have a check coming in next week.
Yeah.
It's a good opportunity to put on the mask of God and get busy.
Yeah. So I was going to say, Bruce Hillman did a video this week, sort of on fear and people's reaction to this. And Caleb also wrote a blog on it this week that was quite good on the same thing. And then Dan, as you and I were sort of working through what to cancel and how to cancel, in the letter that we sent out for sort of postponing engagements that you wrote, you included a quote from Martin Luther in there that is out of a letter in Luther's works, I think it looks like volume 43, titled "Whether One May Flee from Deadly Plague." And I'm just going to read a portion of that because I think it kind of sets the stage maybe for having the theological conversation about, what is reasonable in a time like this for a Christian? How does a Christian react to this type of thing? So I'll just read it. And it says, "I shall ask God mercifully to protect us. Then I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine, and take it. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed in order to not become contaminated, and thus perchance inflict and pollute others, and so cause their death as a result of my negligence. If God should wish to take me, he will surely find me, and I have done what he has expected of me, and so I am not responsible for either my own death or the death of others. If my neighbor needs me, however, I shall not avoid place or person, but will go freely as stated above. See, this is such a God-fearing faith because it is neither brash nor foolhardy and does not tempt God." I think there's it's a short section out of that letter, but I think there's just some, it's not counterintuitive advice, but Martin Luther wrote this in 1543, I think it said there.
There's a couple of them. The other one is in 1527.
Yeah.
Too, which was literally the plague in Wittenberg and other places.
It's just one. It shows sort of the character of Wittenberg too. That it was one of the universities that, even though it was not often looked upon nicely by the church as a whole to sort of embrace new sciences, quote unquote, coming out, especially if it was thought that they conflicted with Holy Scripture. But Wittenberg did in a lot of ways, and you can see some of this in Luther's reaction. There's just on a non-theological side, there's a seemingly sort of early understanding of what we would today call germ theory. that this is an early understanding of the fact that you can give others this thing by your mere presence. And then extrapolating from that, Luther goes into the fact, well, if I can get this and give this just by my mere presence being there, service to my neighbor then means that I avoid those places if I don't need to be there, if they're optional. Right. It's optional that I be there. That is interesting. I like it. The whole thing is focused on vocation toward neighbor, right? Which is really the Lutheran response to how does one live a Christian life? Our answers don't always look like other varieties of Christianity's answers to that question. It's not a bunch of special stuff, right? Digging wells and mission trips. It's very often just living your life in service to neighbor according to the calling that you've been asked to walk in. And in this instance, in service to neighbor, if he doesn't have to be in a place for his other callings, avoid it.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. It's this. This is what he means by it's neither brash nor foolhardy, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's plain.
This is how this is exactly right. Where I don't need to put myself in positions. Also, I think part of I shall avoid places where my presence is not needed. You have to also sort of insert into that the knowledge that you're not think that you are needed in places you are not.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like this is a part of it. Some
Yeah.
people be like, well, I don't know, man, I'm pretty needed.
I'm a
And you're
pretty
like, well, you might
important
not be
guy.
as needed as you might not be as needed as you think you are.
Yeah. Well, and think this is Luther. I mean, he is the celebrity of his area, of his time. There are a lot of places where he could insert himself and did insert himself. Talk about a guy that could walk around believing he was needed almost everywhere
Right.
at the time. For him to sort of back off and say, there are a lot of places where I'm actually not needed.
And part two of that is the places where he is. So
Right.
in the letter, he talks about how
if my neighbor should need
how
me.
like his calling in particular places has been to go be with the dying and the sick in their
Right.
last hours, to bury some people who have the disease. And he writes in this letter that he knows he's come in contact with people and bodies that had or have the disease. And so part of this too is also knowing that there are some, like you said with germ theory and stuff, there are some further things we can do which might enable us to serve our neighbor. So if you are in need to go do something, let's say you're somebody, you have to go grocery shopping in this time in order to bring food back for your family.
We had to go to the post office.
We had to go to the post office today. You have these things. There's also now other things you can do, practical things. When you get home, wash your hands. If if you're sick, ask somebody else to go to the store for you. Like there's a level of this where we can understand too that part of this is also risk management, and that with the data we have, we know that we can still go out in public. So a lot of this, you could still go do things when reasonable. There's calculated risk to be had here, and there's other ways to avert the risk. Hand washing, some types of distancing, sending the younger, healthier people out to do these things, which we know about. And so not, I want to make sure that people know, because it's on, it's been constant in the news cycle, that if you have to go to the post office or you have to go to the grocery store, it's not an instant death sentence.
Yeah, for sure.
Too. And so you shouldn't let fear overwhelm you so much that you don't serve your neighbor, don't you serve yourself.
Correct.
Even.
And I think that's the second
need.
part of that excerpt that I read, that if a neighbor should need him, he'll be there on the spot. Right. The interesting thing is I'm not really on social media, but I can imagine that, and I don't, none of us are currently pastors and or serving a congregation as a pastor. And so I don't really want to second guess the decisions that other pastors are making, either to close when they're asked to close or to stay open when they're asked to close. I don't really want to do that, but it's interesting too that this can be a confusing time, I would guess, if you're a pastor. I just got off the phone with my friend Dave Ruffner, who is a pastor in New Hope Lutheran Church in Hudsonville, Michigan. And he said to me, well, it looks like we won't be having services in person for a while. I said, oh, really? And I'm not really completely up on it. I didn't know that it had gotten to that point in Michigan. I know that they're talking about that type of thing in California, but even in California, they haven't said no services. They've said, please limit your services.
Distance, separate pews, things like that.
And it's got to be a hard time to be a pastor right now, and to sort of make those decisions. But I would think there'd be some sort of metrics upon which you would make the decision to stay open or close that I would hope would be focused around service to neighbor and the gospel.
Right.
Well, and certainly within the Lutheran tradition, but this is true for the church across the board, that older people make up a larger percentage of a church body than they do the general public.
Right.
So, I mean, all day, every day, we hear complaints about how we're going to get more young people in the church. Well, what this means is that your congregation has got some gray hair in it.
Yeah.
And so you have to take this stuff into account. I mean, you have to say, you have to look at your congregation and say, how many people am I putting at risk here? How many of these people have underlying conditions? How many of them are past a certain age threshold? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's hard to it's hard for them to wrestle with, I'm sure, but it would seem that at least in some cases, if not many in most cases, uh, that the actual loving thing to do for your neighbor is to not have service.
It seems like
Um,
one of the things that this can remind us of is that there's a certain haughtiness or arrogance with which we sort of all live our lives in a daily fashion about how important, on a day-to-day basis we are to X, Y, or Z, to our job, to this, to that, and that this is sort of asking you to take a step back and to think of somebody else and their needs that they might not even be thinking of. Um,
Yeah, if you,
before your idea of how important it is for you to be here or there or to do this or whatever.
yeah. I think that there's a fear, and I understand the fear that churches would have. Churches are like anything else, and they depend on people being generous and supporting the church, and so you're going to run into these kind of problems. And some of your biggest givers are older, and they might not be Venmoing you tithe money for the next 4 weeks or whatever. This is a real concern.
No,
They're
I'm
the ones
sure it's
they're the
absolutely
ones
is. Yeah.
Yeah, they're the ones putting the actual check
yeah,
in the actual in the actual
in the
plate.
plate.
So you have those concerns. I'm sure you have the concerns of people be getting used to the idea of not going to church. There's this fear that how long does it take for a habit
Right.
to form?
I think
how
that
many services?
if I were a pastor, that would be my beyond like the health concerns of my congregation. So putting all that aside, I would be concerned. It's a habit thing, is that really going to hear the word and to be fed by word and sacrament is a habit that a Christian creates over a lifetime. And habits are hard to develop and easy to let go of, unless it's a bad habit, in which case it's easy to develop and hard to let go of, right? But something as constructive and as good for self and family as being fed by the word and sacrament every Sunday is, it takes a certain effort on the part of the Christian and the Christian family, and it would be an easy habit to let it go by the wayside.
Right.
That this could sort of,
I think
the devil could use this to worm his way into the situation, and I think people need to be sort of vigilant about that.
right.
Yeah. No, I think I totally understand that concern. I think that there's a possibility anyway that the reverse could happen as well. That one, that absence makes the heart grow fonder can work in a variety of ways. A practical example is there's like a taco place locally that I love and I go to like once a week. Well, I'm not going to be going to that for a couple weeks, but I guarantee you, as soon as they say, as soon as I have the okay, I'm going to be up in that line getting those tacos, and that'll work for me with church as well. I mean, I could miss a Sunday and it's not the end of the world, but not going to church for multiple weeks in a row. As soon as I'm able to go again, I think I'll be there. So I think that this as people are pulled back in their houses with their family stuff, I think that they are going to relish, potentially anyway, the opportunity to get back together with people and to do these things, and that there could be a taking of the communion of saints for granted,
Yeah.
that actually ends up going away on the back end of this whole thing. Because these things are easy to take for granted. This is that being able to interact with people and give people hugs and hang out and laugh and drink and all this sort of stuff. These are all things that we take for granted, and we shouldn't.
Right.
Church is the same way. The communion of saints is the same way. The Lord's Supper, all of this is that way. So there's at least a possibility that some of this works in that direction as well. That people who that sort of take it or leave church and they go sometimes, or the relationships they have there actually start to, as they're at home and as they're not involved in those relationships and those activities, that they actually start to realize how valuable those things really are. And then, of course, you have what always happens in situations like this. You have a pandemic, people actually start thinking about God a little bit more.
Yeah,
thinking about death a little bit more. So there are possibilities there where this is potentially not detrimental to the church, but on the other side is possibly an opportunity for the church to speak into those things, an opportunity for the people that are members of churches to sort of have their and for lack of a better word, I don't want to sound too enthusiastic here, but to sort of have some of that love rekindled for the body of believers that
Yeah.
they're a part
Yeah,
of,
a
and that kind
longing.
of stuff. Yeah, I think I
Yeah.
think that could absolutely happen.
On the flip side of that, what's kind of funny is my last article before this one I wrote about sort of vocation and comfort and a Christian response to COVID, was about sort of how in many parts of the church we've lost education, catechesis, at-home worship, and things like that in a large extent, where certain parts of Christian life have just been exported out onto Sunday. And, as people are sort of realizing this, if Sunday disappears for some people, now's also a good time to form that habit. I mean, in the Reformation with Luther, that these weren't mutually exclusive habits.
That's right.
Worship,
That's absolutely right.
Worship in the home and worship in the church were together. They were a thing that formed the entirety of the Christian life. This I think could be an excellent opportunity to do that, especially as there are more resources than ever to help people try to catechize and worship in the home. I mean, honestly, that's so much of what 1517 does, is provide these resources, outlines, and even method. You can take some of the things that we try to teach here on the Thinking Fellows and talk about on the Thinking Fellows, and go and do them without ever listening to an episode again, right? It can be that, and I kind of hope for that. One of the things I would point out to people is this is one of those times where something like a hymnal is amazing, because if you open it up, there are tools in there for families worship, for family prayer, for household prayer, for individual prayers, prayer and service in the time of disparity, evening and morning. You have children at home all day now with all these school closures. As people who have never homeschooled before get into a homeschool habit, your kids have been at public school for however many years. You could now change it up a little bit. You can open school with prayer. You can end school with prayer. You can change, the habit of your life. And this is an opportunity to be able to do that.
Yeah. I was just looking for the line and people should check it out in, the book is actually called Handing Over Goods. It's a festschrift for gymnastic that we gave out last year at Here We Still Stand. But in the article that I put in the back, which is a lecture that Jim gave at the Word Alone conference some years ago called Handing Over the Goods, he's got this line in there. And I was just thinking about this, with all these people stuck at home and this idea of the possibilities of home worship as you long for the time when corporate worship can be a thing again. He says in here, and it had to do with Luther printing the catechisms on poster board so they could be hung in the dining room. With this move, Lutherans moved the altar from the chancel into the kitchen. They moved the altar by providing the basic form of the word in simple and expressive way for the families to use. And I thought, man, that's an opportunity like no other right now. I also was sort of reminded, Caleb, of a part of your article that you wrote last week. I don't have it word for word, but where you outline an interesting thing that Christians sometimes believe it's their job to save the whole world, and that one of the hardest things is the realization that as a Christian that's not your job. Right, that's what Christ has promised to do. Right, that's John 3:16 language. But that your job is more basic.
Right,
and it's more personal. Do you want to?
Yeah, the way I tried to formulate that is that the Christian response to this is both completely common and utterly unique, and it's common in everything that we've been talking about as a vocational response and service to neighbor, even down to basic things like realizing you should probably wash your hands more. Or if you work at a job that has a lot of public contact, realizing, wow, why haven't we been sanitizing grocery carts
we were just
for the
talking
last
about that
10
in
years?
the car. He's like, in the grocery store, they're sanitizing everything. I'm like, yeah, that's it. And airplanes too. Like, I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten from airlines telling me that they're
sanitizing
fumigating planes, every night. And I'm like, yes, please.
Maybe we should have been doing some of this. But also completely unique in that, we do not have to bear the weight of the world when it's not our vocation. So, of course, if there's a Christian doctor out there who's on the team developing a vaccine, they have a little more weight in the practicality.
Yeah, but we bear the weight of our neighbor.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's how he's doing that. So, but in the existential form here of everybody's of dread and things like this, we actually have an answer that isn't just self-meditation and calm breathing and things like this. I mean, as the response has been growing, the secular culture has been aching for some part of the emotional and existential response to this,
Right.
not just the practical stuff. And Christianity really does have the only answer. We do not have to face the entirety of the world because Christ already did. He faced the entirety of sin in the world, which is included things like disease. So often when we say that phrase, we think only those things which I have done. But when Christ faces the sin and the consequence of sin at the cross for the entire world, that includes the suffering here and now too. And in fact, he suffered for and with us at the cross.
The great thing in that article that I kind of pulled away from at least that section was the weight of the world, being the preacher for the world, isn't on your shoulders. But at times like this, when your family might not have access to their regular preacher, maybe the weight of being a preacher for your family and for your friends and for your neighbors that you are in contact with while you're shut in,
and that's
is your vocation.
And that is a vocation. Yeah, and that's vocational as well.
So tell them of Christ's death and resurrection for them. Tell them of Christ's love for them, so much so that he gave his life as a sacrifice. So they might be
and
saved.
as Luther says, tell them, the one quote that I used from this 1527, as addressed to the plague here, was about how Luther says, the devil uses the scare of pandemic and disease to do two things. Number one, to think that the worst thing that can happen to you right now is that you die.
Yeah.
And two, to have that fear cripple you so much that you stop serving your neighbor. And that first aspect is he's saying you're relinquishing your faith in Christ. You actually have your fear overcomes that faith. You forget that Christ actually faced death for you, and that in your baptism you already died. You already faced death. And so
that your promise is life.
Right, and that there's a promise. And so in this particular times, the thing we have to cling to is that the promises of Christ. In fact, that the promises of Christ are greater than our greatest fear, and our greatest fears in this time. And so, and that's the unique part of the Christian vocation outside of those, other people in the world, is that we can actually deliver those promises to people too. Everyday ordinary people, fathers, mothers, even children can share this with their parents. The word needs a preacher, and now is this time where you are called to do that and to proclaim the promises of Christ against the fear of the world.
The world needs a preacher. Romans 10. Go for it, Dan. Take us out.
Yeah, well, I think that all that is exactly right. I mean, when Jesus says, so the most common words out of Jesus' mouth is in his entire ministry are "do not be afraid" or some version of it. It's more than anything else. There's not it's not even that close. It's "do not be afraid," "fear not," this sort of stuff. Way more than anything else.
Why are you afraid?
He's not saying that there's not any reason to fear. This is not what he's saying. There's plenty of reasons to be afraid. But what he is saying is that he's overcome all that which you can be that does trouble you, right? And so it's not an irrational thing that says just don't have any concerns. Don't be concerned about
it's
anything.
a reminder that sin, death, and the devil are his. Well, he's conquered them.
And the way that fear is displaced is by God speaking. And the way that God speaks to us now is through other people. It's through this means. It's on the lips of another people. You quite literally have to speak for God and deliver his promises. And, when Christ comforts the disciples who are afraid on the waters, as the storm rises up, as the wind blows and starts tipping and flooding their boat, it is the word of God which comforts them. God speaks his promise over the water and over his disciples, and that's ultimately what brings comfort. And as long as God is silent to these people now, they're just going to be left in fear. They're going to be left in fear of what the world is revealing to them, and that's sin, death, and the law. And God is not silent. He speaks through us, and we need to proclaim that promise.
Yeah, I mean, this is when Jesus says that, "My peace I leave with you, not that which the world gives." This does mean that it's going to be a different kind of peace.
That's right.
So it's not even peace as we understand it necessarily.
Yeah,
it's a peace that's altogether different than
the peace that surpasses all understanding.
Right. Exactly. And so Jesus has no need to say, "I'm going to send you a comforter," if we have nothing in this life to be comforted in.
From him.
Yeah, and so there's plenty. We are going to in this world you will have many troubles.
That's right.
This is also a promise, right?
That's right.
And so we
pick up your cross and follow me.
Yeah. So yeah. we have trouble. We have reasons to have anxiety, but we also have this promise that He has given us a peace that we can have in the midst of that, because we know He's ultimately conquered all these things. We have a God who infinitely cares for us, and so this is knowledge that the world doesn't have. This is peace that that an unbeliever cannot have. They don't have the knowledge that there is a almighty creator of heaven and earth who loves them, who is concerned with them, and not just, hey, I really like you, but has done all things necessary to finally bring them home.
God sent His Son that they might have life.
Yeah, yeah. And so this is the peace we have, that that though we all die,
yet shall we live.
We are going to be raised up on the last day, and doesn't mean that. And I think this ties into sort of when Luther says this shouldn't make us brash or foolhardy.
Yeah. Amen to that. That is that's so wise.
Yeah, it doesn't make us either of those things. During these times are a wonderful time. A pandemic seems like a very good time for Christians to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Like that seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
Which is Jesus' way of saying being smart, but also, like, I don't know, maybe don't go hoarding everything in your supermarket. That's not harmless as dove of thing to do.
I was just thinking that I literally just went shopping because we have some stock of food. We can make it a little while, but the way you keep a stock is by continuing to buy what you need, right? And as I was
and Emerson's been running low on chicken nuggets.
Yeah, that's right. Frozen chicken nuggets are running thin. I couldn't buy any. Thank you, Corona flu. But the main thing here is I noticed there were specific items hit through the store, like just gone, mm-hmm. right? Frozen vegetables, canned vegetables, gone. Certain frozen foods, gone. Just entirely in a situation where, on a normal week when people are just buying what they need, aren't gone. And now somebody who is behind on the pandemic purchasing can't probably just buy what they need in certain sections of the store.
Yeah.
So
I think everyone here can agree that it's hoarding up stuff is not acting in love of neighbor in any way. Like, no. I don't have any problem just sort of like straight out condemning that and say, like, look, go get the stuff you need. Don't be foolhardy. Like, it'd be good for you to have a week or two of stuff ready to go. But you go and buy every single thing. You go and buy 20 pounds of all the ground beef, which someone did, because I went there. You buy all of it, and this is not a good way to love your neighbor. It's just not.
Right.
And so, go get the things that you need.
If you have all the hand sanitizer, your neighbor can't sanitize their hands, and you're more likely to get it. Like, this is
exactly.
You actually might make even your own condition worse in this sense.
And I would say this too, as now my kid's at home with me for at least 2 weeks, probably longer. I'm sort of anticipating it being longer. As you talk about like home worship and this kind of thing, it's also, man, this is a really good opportunity for you to be. You're sort of forced to be with your family, and that's not the worst thing in the world. Like, so, I did something that I never do. Like, I made cookies with my daughter, like at 1:00 in the afternoon, because she's there, she's bored, and we said, all right, let's do this, and we did that together. And there is an opportunity for you to try to do things I don't want her freaked out. She knows that everything's not normal. She doesn't. Why is she home right now? It doesn't make any sense, And just finding ways to interact with your children and love them, or if you're not, you don't have kids at home, with your wife or whatever it is. You have been sort of gifted by force this thing, like, hey, you and your wife might have not done a lot of talking. Well, guess what? You're about to get to know each other all over again.
Yeah, I'm with Eric for a week or so now. I've been predicting a baby boom out of this, so we'll see.
Yeah, and that's those are sort of like maybe silver linings on this that you will get to interact with your family in ways that you weren't before, because we're busy, constantly distracted, and that's about to slow
always leaving
down for a lot of people.
Yeah, slowed me down quite a bit.
No, it's it'll be interesting. Well, hey Dan, thanks for joining this special episode. It's I don't want people to think this is just an attempt to capitalize on COVID-19. I think really we do have a unique opportunity here to comfort people. 1517 is in a unique position where it has already developed a lot of resources for people for use in the home and in personal study of
this
the
is
faith.
our infrastructure, man.
And so, I want people to be aware that those things exist. So if you are only a listener of the Thinking Fellows or a new listener of Thinking Fellows, you can go to 1517.org to see all of our blogs and the like. Maybe now is a good time to pick up reading books. People don't read as many books anymore.
We're going to do a show on what to do while you're stuck at home.
So shop.1517.org. There's a list of books that you can look at there. And then, I would also say we're building up our YouTube channel now too, full of things. So you can go check that out. If you're looking for more worship-oriented resources and things like that, we have Hidden Streams, which is devotions through the Psalms, which I think follows a really nice order of music, reading, devotion, and music again. Seems very akin to the liturgical order somebody might be comfortable with at church. And we're exploring further options of what we can provide people in this time as well.
We have You Are Forgiven podcast, which is
preaching.
And some of the best sermons you'll ever hear as recorded over the last 3 years by Lutheran pastors all over the South.
And we know that some people's churches, don't have the means to record or distribute sermons. So if you're missing that out and you're looking for some preaching right now in these times, that is available. Yeah. So You Are Forgiven. It's on if you're listening to Thinking Fellows, you can listen to that on the same podcasting app. So you can just type in You Are Forgiven. You'll see a logo that looks very kin 1517 style, has a 1517 logo on it. You should be able to click that right away. All right. Thank you for listening to this episode. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.